I just recorded a video explaining how I view the Tesla-SpaceX merger and providing for the first time in the community, in the analyst and investor community on SpaceX, Tesla and AI, a quantitative model that explains how we have to think as Tesla shareholders when and on what time frames the Tesla-SpaceX merger is bad for us as Tesla shareholders and when it starts being good for us. So check out that video. But today I want to make one more point why I'm so incredibly bullish on SpaceX as a business, regardless of the Tesla question, and point out one interesting thing that I found that I want to use to explain the amount of economic pressure, of demand pressure, of financial numbers that are standing ready to flow into the SpaceX business and why this is such a unique and insane situation. So let's go right to the point here. So the Kobeissi letter, some people hate them. I think they're fine. They're just providing some insights sometimes. So they're pointing out the US data center construction spending. So this is not the spending on the actual chips and everything. It's just the construction, right? How much is being spent on the actual real estate here and building these things, including the energy and everything, has jumped 34% year over year in March to a record $50 billion just in construction, real estate construction for the data centers. And I want to comment on this and show you guys what that means for SpaceX. Let me explain that in a second. And I have another little model for you to understand what I mean. Spending on data centers is up 437% since the beginning of 2021. That's only 5 years ago, 437%, so nearly 5x, 4.5x. Since 2021, when the annualized rate stood at 9 billion. And don't forget that was pre-AI, of course, but data centers were a big thing. AWS, Google, the cloud expansion, so it's not even small, but it was 9 billion. It's also up 688% since the start of 2018, right? Because there you see the growth, crazy growth, just pre-AI even of data centers. And here comes the interesting thing, just to put it in perspective. Meanwhile, office building construction spending fell 9% in March to 46 billion, the lowest since 2015. And that means this. Look at this chart. On the light blue line, you see data center construction only spending. And you see general office construction spending of the entire United States. And that chart tells you a lot. The entire spend on commercial real estate or office construction in the United States is now eclipsed by the spend on data centers. And what you also see is the growth is incredible. The growth since AI happened in 2023 is on a straight line up. Now, what does it all have to do with SpaceX? Let me explain what I think it has to do with it. What is overlooked, and the point I will be making for the coming weeks when we dive much deeper into SpaceX analysis and the crazy orbital AI build-out analysis, is that we have to understand, for the first time in the history of humanity, do we have a business model? And I mean not an abstract economic opportunity, I mean a tight business model, token, dollars per token, dollars per gigawatt, capex per gigawatt, like a super watertight business model where everything is clear and you have giant margins for everyone involved, for the token providers, to consumers and businesses, to the chip builders, to the people operating the data centers, where everyone makes enormous amounts of money, all the way to the end user who just creates infinite economic value for the first time in history. We have a business model here that can be, as it is, infinitely scaled. This thing can be scaled to 1 million times of the current global economy, to 1 billion times, to 1 trillion times. We have to understand this. The reason being, for the first time, we manufacture something that in itself creates infinite value. Infinite value because of the fundamental first principle of human economics. What we produce is intelligence. And intelligence, what is intelligence? Intelligence is our tool, our weapon to engineer reality. With intelligence, you can achieve anything you want. You can shape, create, and engineer any future reality you want. And if you can't engineer your future reality, it is because you don't have enough intelligence. So how do you get there? If you hit a reality you can't engineer, you buy more tokens. And that is it. There is nothing more. That's it. Intelligence is the way to take matter and energy in the universe and transform it into a constellation that you like better. That's fundamentally what intelligence is. There are not many things in the universe. There's matter, and there's energy, and there's information. That's it. Nothing else. Maybe time, maybe. I'm not sure. But matter, energy, and intelligence, and knowledge, information. That information tells you how energy and matter is combined. It tells you the constellation of matter and energy. And whatever you can dream of, whatever future you want, if you want to have a large family, if you want to have beautiful cities with people you like and everyone is nice, or if you want to have space colonies, if you want to mine distant planets, it doesn't matter what you want. If you want a big car, if you want a nice t-shirt, if you want to live on Mars, if you want to own Jupiter, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Whatever you can imagine is just the same as it is now, only in a different constellation. Jupiter exists, you exist, you just don't own Jupiter, but that's just a little formality. You could own it. You just have to figure out how, okay? You could have limitless clean energy for everyone forever if you knew how. So you can do the exercise. If you knew how, you can get anything. And that knowing how is called intelligence. And that intelligence we can now buy. Now there are heavy limits on it. If you want to own Jupiter now, there are not enough, you don't have enough tokens. Anthropic doesn't have enough tokens to figure that out. But if it had 10 million times more tokens, it could figure it out. So we have to understand intelligence scales limitlessly in its economic value. And that means the demand for intelligence is infinite. And not in the future, but today. We have reached the critical thing somewhere around 2025. I remember I sat in a nice little library in Oregon. Not in Oregon, in Vancouver, Washington. When I brought this video to you, when I told you the singularity just has started. The singularity has started because we are now on an inevitable fast track to AGI, and now we have reached it. We have reached economic AGI. And from here, it's just infinity. Now there are many risks and problems, and we might all die. That's the main thing, that has to be considered, but that's not part of this video. What that all means is, we are seeing this trajectory, and we can take this trajectory to do a little math on SpaceX. Let's do that. Here is a model. Very raw, very basic model. I just hacked that together. Where you see the growth in data center construction spent in billions of dollars in the United States. It's exactly the chart plotted. Here you see the growth rate. Doesn't matter too much. But because of what I just said, because of my theory that there's infinite economic potential, we can assume that that growth rate of 35% a year will never stop. Okay? I'm not saying we will grow US construction spending on data centers 35% into infinity, because of course there are massive constraints. You have limited land, you have super limited energy, so we will hit a hard stop in 2027, 2028, 2029. So that number is definitely wrong, right? I continue that growth. That number is definitely wrong when it comes to reality, what will happen. But it is a number that we can use to project how much money people would love to spend, want to spend, can spend on data center construction spending. So what the number here is not how much will be spent in the United States. I can more or less guarantee you this will not be spent because there will be massive protests. People will get very mad. The energy is going to run out. There's not enough gas turbines, the whole mess. But it tells us something else, how much we could spend, because that growth rate tells us a little bit more. It tells us how much people want intelligence, but also how well people are able to form capital around it. So this is a very empirically important number. It means that we can form capital at that rate, and given the enormous economic value that is proven out as we speak, the probability that we can keep forming capital or keep up the capital formation at the same speed is extremely high, if not guaranteed. And that's conservative. It might go up. But let's say conservatively, we keep it at 35% capital formation rate. That is the demand curve. Okay, that is the demand curve or the pressure curve of capital that needs to be spent. Okay, now the problem is the capital cannot be spent for the reasons I explained. So what happens to the capital? The capital gets angry. The capital gets hungry. The capital says, I don't care about your little complaints, citizens. I don't care about your little complaints about energy, you stupid little energy people. I'm greedy, hungry capital. I need to be spent. I want growth. And then the white knight comes to the rescue, the white knight of SpaceX and the Starship, and says, you know what? I take your money because I have enough space. I know a space that has infinite space, and it's called You guessed it, space. And all that now comes down to the question, can Starship and can SpaceX, deliver the AI, orbital AI data center promise, and when? And I here assume it can do so starting next year, but on a tiny little fraction of 1% of US build out, but then it goes up significantly. I'm actually very conservative here. I'm assuming that SpaceX will grab 10% per year of the entire market over time. The real trajectory might be a little more aggressive than that, but let's just be conservative. Let's say they pull off Starship production and start scaling as fast as they can, and over time they can grab 10% every single year in additional market share, going up to 80% of the entire US build out. I think it's also the global build out, but that's a different story. Depending how the deal with China goes and if they're allowed to even build out for other people from a national security perspective. But let's just say US, okay? These are my assumptions. Maybe you think I'm crazy, but I don't think that's crazy at all. Maybe the ramp is too fast in the beginning, but maybe it's too slow compared to what's going to happen. Don't underestimate the ridiculous pressure on SpaceX to get this done. They will raise $75 billion this year, and they will pour it all into Starship mass manufacturing. They have to prove out Starship works this year. Let's see if they can do it. It needs to really work. It needs to be commercially ready. It's a highly complicated operation, as you know, but they have made great progress. I have a certain confidence. I think it's more likely than not that Starship will be ready commercially in 2027, and I can't even tell you what that means. It's the craziest thing that ever happened. The build out will be insane. We will have tens of thousands of Starships. We will have hundreds of launches in every single day, probably by in the 2030s, in the early 2030s. It will be the biggest operation ever. It will transport us at a ridiculous level into orbit and to the moon soon after that. Okay, enough talk. What about the numbers? Here are the numbers. The demand of data center construction build out. And note, that has nothing to do with the chips. This has nothing to do who operates these things. This is true for Google, Amazon, Oracle, all the partners of SpaceX. They need to spend that money on SpaceX and their satellites. I will go to this in a second. But here you have 68 billion, 90 billion, 123 billion, 167 billion, 225 billion, 300 billion, 400 billion. That is coming. By the way, ARK Invest projects 2035, Starlink will make $300 billion in revenue for SpaceX. Here I'm telling you, just the construction budgets for AI will exceed that by a lot. Hey, on this channel, we do something very important. We deeply analyze, understand, and predict capital, AGI, and politics. Not just to beat the markets and make a lot of money, even though that's important, but also to build a new society and make the future good for all of us, the pioneers. If you want to help me on this journey, you can do that by doing a very simple thing. Like and subscribe. It helps me a lot. Thank you so much for your support, and let's get back to the video. Actually, we'll exceed it by 2x. So ARK's projection of Starlink revenue will be dwarfed by just data center build out budgets for SpaceX by 2035, 600 billion. Just to tell you, just some random little detail here, doubles the entire revenue of the biggest cash cow of SpaceX in parallel, okay? So what does it all mean? I would project that they make $700 million already next year in orbital lift revenue from Starship, from that build out, then jumping to roughly 10 billion in 2028, to 24 billion, to 50 billion, to 90 billion, to 152 billion, to 246 billion, and so on. Because they're grabbing a larger share of the build out, because the pressure just mounts exponentially on Earth, because they can't do it anymore while they need to grow like crazy. That pressure gives you these numbers. This is real cash into SpaceX. Now, to be accurate, that is the construction costs, and that includes the AI satellite construction costs without the chips, so just the hull, kind of. You can debate that. You could argue that's not really the construction cost for the whatever, but some surrounding pieces of the satellite are part of that. And the orbital lift share. And maybe the satellite construction doesn't even go to SpaceX, so maybe they only get half of it. I assume half. I think orbital lift is actually more than that, because the satellite construction share does not include the core GPUs and everything. That's not part of the construction statistics. And it doesn't include the racks. It just includes the radiation, the radiators, and the solar panels. That's included there. So I don't know if that's half-half. It's probably less than half, so orbital lift share would be larger. But even then, you can do the math. SpaceX would double its projected revenue that ARC projects on Starlink just through that. And long story short, this is not an accurate prediction model. This is just giving you some sense for what's happening and how quickly it's happening. SpaceX could rake in $10 billion in revenue, high margin revenue, by the way. And here, 24 billion and 50 billion, that's half of the entire Tesla revenue already by 2030, just by that Lift AI satellite business. So there you have it. That is my argument, one of the many arguments, why I'm so bullish on this whole situation, why I think SpaceX is the biggest thing that has ever happened. We need to stay rational as Tesla shareholders, what we want. Watch the other video to see how the merger affects the Tesla share price and how we make the most money in what time frame. But this is big. Make no mistake. This is not pie in the sky. This is something that happens. This chart is real. This chart tells you what actually happened. Look at that. Look at that. If you would have told anyone in 2018 that 8 years later, there will be more money spent in the United States on building out data centers than on the entire office construction of the entire nation, everyone would have thought you have completely lost your marbles. But you would have been right. That gives you a little hint what's going on here. These are not peanuts. This is the most massive build out in the history of humanity. And now Elon has cornered the actual market of that build out and everyone has to get on his Starship. That is exactly what's going to happen, and it's going to happen very, very soon. Much sooner than anyone thinks. By 2028, it's game over. I hope that was interesting. See you tomorrow.